Hello, everybody. I am super excited to be joined by Michael Varda of Craft Beer Advisory Service today. We're going to dive into craft beer consumers, who goes where. But, Michael, first off, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Andrew. It is, I guess the unseasonably warm temperatures are fading, but it's not too bad. I've enjoyed it while it's lasted. We've enjoyed it longer than we should have for our geography.
I think this last Sunday was the last patio day we might get for the year in Virginia. So it was definitely a beautiful one to enjoy beer outdoors.
Yeah, absolutely. How are you doing, Andrew?
I can't complain. I'm in this weird course of virtual in person, virtual in person. I'm glad to see you virtually right now. I know we need to get together in person soon, but today I'm excited to learn from you. I know a lot of other people are excited. Can you first off tell us a little bit more about what Craft Beer Advisory Services is doing these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Craft Beer Advisory Services is now over a year old, and what a year it's been. We started off pursuing custom research projects with breweries and had a fun year of doing that. But really, based on a lot of the feedback and just interactions that we've had with breweries for 2023, we're shifting to a totally membership-based model where we'll be putting out a schedule of craft beer consumer research. We'll start off right off the bat in January of 2023. And what that allows us to do is really serve more breweries, broaden our impact, and also keep the costs lower. When you have a schedule of something and that's what you're going to do, it's you can lower the cost for breweries, and that's ultimately what we're in the business of doing, is providing craft breweries who historically may not have been able to access these types of insights and really become that sort of strategic backbone for marketing, branding, taproom experience, and so on.
What are your goals that the breweries that interact with you use this data for? Like, what would be a success in your mind for a brewery member?
Yeah, absolutely. So really the bottom line is more money, right? More revenue. And the ways that we get to that is looking at all of these consumer insights. What type of beers are popular during which seasons? What food menu are you maybe missing? What entertainment types are going to drive visitors to your tap room? And looking at a year's worth of data, understanding what resonates with different populations. So what resonates with a beer geek is going to be different than a social gatherer, than it is a family, which we'll get into all of that today. But at the end of the day, our research is going to tell you what consumers are looking for, who is looking for what, and then advise those slight adjustments to ultimately make more dollars and be stronger in your community too. Be that center for community gathering and relationships and all the beautiful things that craft beer is.
Awesome. So, what is your current findings teaching you lately?
Yeah, it's a good question. So recently, just presented at NanoCon, where we did an update on a presentation that we did for the spring virtual conference, that being craft beer consumer personas. And one of the things that we'll dive into, I have some slides here to just show our listeners kind of exactly who we're talking about, what type of data we're looking at, but then also looking at the differences between a nano brewery customer versus either like a regional or larger microbrewery customer. So really, without further ado, I will dive into some of the presentation and some of the content here so we can get right to it.
And as Michael and I discussed offline, we've spent so much of the year looking at slides. So we want to keep this as conversational, as actionable as possible for you. So if you have any questions, thoughts, please drop them in the chat as we go. Michael's here to answer and respond back.
Awesome. Very cool. So the 6 types of taproom customers, who you serve and what they want. Before we get into the 6, you need to understand how the 6 were essentially created. So looking at the study demographics, we scraped 2021 reviews spanning 68 randomly selected breweries across 36 states. And what you see on the map there is where those reviews came from in terms of where the consumers were from. The darker states had more consumers. The lighter states had fewer. Only a couple states there were not represented by a beer drinker. So what did we do with these reviews? One of the most popular questions we get is like, okay, yeah, review 4 out of 5 stars. I had a good time. What can we learn from that? The answer is in the details. So for each of these over 1,300 reviews, we put it through an 18-factor motivation matrix, is what I've started to call it, where things like beer variety all the way to parking and cleanliness of restrooms and entertainment types, the environment, all kinds of different factors that could potentially influence how your visit goes. Each review is put through that matrix where we then looked at what were the top things surfacing for all types of people in terms of what they're talking about in their experience. And after that, we looked at those and started to find patterns in behavior. So people who are mentioning the social elements, the vibe of a place or the environment of a place, or people that were so obsessed about the food offerings or the pizza, or you're getting to down the list here on the consumer persona breakdowns, a beer geek, somebody who's talking about the different hops used in the beer that they're drinking and those types of things. Ultimately looked at all of these consumer personas, looked and what broke down what's important not only to them returning, but what's also important to them, what would also make them never return again. So we will dive into that. And just for context for our listeners, what you're looking at on the screen right now is the larger regional slash microbrewery, mid-sized brewery selection. And Andrew and I are going to talk a little bit here about the differences between this group and also the nano brewery segment, since that data was hot, fresh off the press as well. So first up, for the larger segment of breweries here, the number one segment was social gatherers, and this is about 50% of the overall consumer base. So kind of orienting you to the slide a little bit, there will be, for each segment at the top left, a high level understanding of who these people are. Then we'll look at gender on the sort of middle left-hand side, overall sentiment of the reviews. On the top right, we'll look at the motivators, whether that was positive or an experienced detractor. And then on the bottom right, get an idea of who the competitors are, a sample review so you can understand what type of person actually fit that category, and then a key takeaway there for everybody as they think about how they can resonate with this particular group. So now that that's out of the way, thinking about the social gatherers, they are looking at the overall sentiment on the bottom left, generally a more positive group than the overall benchmark, meaning the entire sample. The social gatherer segment was more likely to have a good time, leave a positive review. And shifting to the right-hand side of the screen, why that is. Number one, the most motivating thing for a positive visit was that environment and location. And I think so often, Andrew, we hear about the vibes of a place or, what makes that experience. And, a lot of the things that we learned from the study was that vibes are often built by an outdoor element, built by a sort of natural gift of, depending on where your brewery is located, that could be anything from a beautiful mountain landscape to something that is, in a more urban setting, a beautiful skyline view, just something that's going to immerse the consumer in that environment, help them envision what's going on. Second and third was beer variety and food. Spoiler alert, this is important for everybody. But one thing to call out is that variety is much more important than a specific beer. The social gatherers are just looking for, a lot of different options. These are potentially the folks that are ordering a flight. Shifting to the right-hand column there with the negative experience detractors, number one is service. And, this is going to be kind of a theme that we see throughout the presentation, but understanding that especially now in the I'm hesitant to say post-pandemic world, but in most geographies across the country, they're operating to something that's closer to what was pre-pandemic. Making sure that the service is not only efficient but friendly. That is the real difference maker there. People are a bit less patient, data would suggest, from the nano breweries segment to this, which is a little difference in dates there. The nano breweries with some more recent data. Um, but people are more willing to wait than they are if there's a rude interaction with a staff member. So let's kind of pause there. I know we're going to chat a little bit about the differences here, Andrew. Any thoughts or questions?
No, it's really interesting. One thing that's resonated with me that you said recently is that, and I've used it in multiple presentations because it's so fascinating. You said that I believe 53% of people who are visiting breweries are these social gatherers. And
Yeah.
Michael, I would love to hear your thoughts. You know, these social gatherers are obviously motivated by the environmental elements, like the vibe, like you speak of. But what are some strategies you believe we can turn these social gatherers into loyal customers who just come back versus going to whatever place has the best atmosphere of the day?
Yeah, it's a great question. So thinking about how you get these folks back, it's going to be the more socialized events that are going to keep them coming. If they're there to have fun with their friends and enjoy a couple drinks and maybe some food, you think about what's going to really keep them in the tap room, and that's going to be an opportunity to watch a game with their friends or play a game, have the trivia. Those types of elements are what's going to attract these people. And when you think about the vibes of a place, it's also what's going on at the place. Is there live music? So thinking about those events that are typically geared towards the social people, the ones that are just there to relax after a long day's work or whatever it might be. That's really how we can think about this segment type. One thing that I'm going to touch on here is with the nano brewery segment. I fully anticipated social gatherers to be the number one population, but social gatherers were actually number two for the nano brewery segment, which was a real complete surprise to me. Particularly thinking about the nano breweries, a lot of it, at least stereotypically, I think neighborhood vibes, and that's what comes to mind immediately. But social gatherers were actually the number two segment for nano breweries, which is a nice kind of segue into what was number two for the larger scale, but number one for nano breweries.
Way to set up that teaser, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Isn't that beautiful? So sticking with the data that's on your screen right now, the biggest surprise of our presentation today, foodies are motivated by food, of course, right? But thinking about how we can break that down a little bit further, I'm going to sort of build an imaginary ladder, if you will. And the top rung on that ladder is a full kitchen. That's where consumers are most likely to return based on their experience. Third would be a limited kitchen. What I mean by limited kitchen is maybe you have 2 or 3 specialties, you have some variations of flatbreads or pretzels, things like that. Second would be the second rung would be the sort of food trucks or small bites type of situation where maybe based on state law or just your physical space, you're unable to have an attached kitchen. And then last but not least is, well, I should say last and somewhat least in a way, because the consumers are least likely to return based on food, is if you allow delivery services. And we look at that as like a minimum. If you have nothing else or can't do anything else for any restrictions that could be in place, you have to allow those delivery services, because Foodies being the number 2 segment for the larger scale breweries and the number 1 segment for nano breweries, it is more apparent than ever that in order to really enjoy and maximize those consumers, there has to be some element of food, some element of grub that's going to keep them there and extend the visit. I don't know about you, Andrew, but after a couple beers, I do get awfully hungry.
I like planning my visits around food and beer, Michael. So it's definitely an important part for me. Now, Michael, I have a question. This could be based off the data you've seen or just your general insights. Do you see or feel there's any difference in quality of experience based on the style of food offerings, whether it's in-house, food truck, or delivery? Does it make a difference?
In terms of brand loyalty, it does make a little bit of a difference because thinking about what's going to draw that customer back, they can come back anytime if you offer that food 7 days a week. But if they're coming there for that food truck, that's already a limitation on when they're going to visit or when they're thinking about visiting, because they really want to just use the example of the last time we were in Richmond together, that barbecue food truck that I had. That was a delicious thing. And if I was going to go back, based on that, I'd be checking their food truck schedule, and maybe I wouldn't go as often because that wasn't there. So it certainly makes a difference if you're able to serve it in house. That's going to be higher up on that ladder of likelihood to return. So something that's really, really important there for folks to think about. And one of the more challenging things is this is also a segment where competitor sets are really large. Thinking about who the competitors are, it's not just breweries, it's restaurants with a decent beer list, it's traditional pubs and local bars where they can get good, sort of like pub style food. So this is a segment that's particularly challenging, but obviously very, very important.
When we look at food that people are enjoying at breweries, what are the top options you see mentioned in your data?
Yeah, so the top things, well, the number one was pizza by far. And, it's kind of funny because I don't know, I think about the breweries that I at least frequent around my local geography, and, pizza's not necessarily offered at a lot of them. But after that, it's things like burgers, it's things like chicken wings and sandwiches, just for a sort of top four right there.
Do you think there's any value in going outside of those common items? I'm not going to throw out a certain style of food, but if a brewery is looking outside the box of ways to attract more loyal customers, should they consider food options that aren't currently available at their nearby breweries?
Yeah, I mean it's a great way to think about that, because some of the things that really pop into my head, like tacos. You could make so many different kinds of tacos relatively easily. It's going to be the same toppings more or less, maybe a couple of different meats or protein substitutes, whatever suits your fancy. But you're thinking about in your region, man, if even in your own head, like for brewery owners and brewery workers, like what are you longing for in your local community? What's not there? And if there's an opening there, absolutely think about taking that. So we're going to shift now to the third largest group here for the microbreweries and larger beer geeks. And beer geeks are the ones that are interested in chatting with the brewer. They're the ones that are want to try all the beers and put their taste sensing to the test. And they are a very happy group. As you look at the bottom left there, overall sentiment, extremely high likelihood of positive reviews here. And thinking about competitors, this is also a segment where it's very, very limited competition. It's other breweries, it's craft beer bars, or the pubs with only the best beer lists, in your local community. And looking at that positive return visit motivator thing there, you see beer variety and then specific beer. This is one of the only groups that actually cares about a specific beer. So that's really fascinating, and something that I think we get tied up in our own biases a little bit with who we might serve or who we interact with, just being so involved in the craft beer industry. And it's actually a smaller segment of people, the beer geeks are, in the broader sense of who's actually coming to the tap room. And thinking about the nano brewery segment, the beer geeks were actually even less of a factor. Only 11% of nano brewery reviews were fit the beer geek model here. So it's interesting because owners oftentimes are the brewers themselves, and they are so passionate about the craft that they're making. But the consumers, while there's certainly some of them that care about that element, it's not necessarily the most important element to what they're doing. Just from a consumer standpoint, they're not necessarily coming in because of that. There are a lot of other factors at play.
That's really interesting. Now, looking back to social gatherers, Michael, you talk a lot about them looking for that overall experience. And we go into beer geeks, and beer geeks are looking for the opportunity to interact with the brewer, really nerd out, maybe the ingredients, the brewing process, anything related to the actual, beer making process itself. And a while back, you had mentioned that events are a great way, obviously, to get people into a tap room. What does your insight show with regard to an event that might work for both beer geeks and the social gatherer?
Yeah, that's a great question there. I see as you were talking, we had a comment there from Madeline: customer you want versus customer you have. And that's a really fascinating dichotomy there, Madeline. It's absolutely true. But thinking about the types of events and entertainment, the number one thing for customers in terms of this data set, brewery tours. They really love it across all of these different consumer segments that we're talking about today, because if you think about it, a brewery tour, if you brought a family, skipping ahead a little bit, if you brought a family, it's something where you're going to have 15, 20 minutes of a presentation or however long it may be. And you're going to have that sort of interaction. You're going to learn about the brewery. You're going to learn about the beer. It's also an opportunity. A lot of the breweries will couple the actual tour with taste testing, or have a deal on a flight later, so you can start to taste some of the beers that they talked about on the tour. And that's a type of event that actually rated number one in overall entertainment for breweries. It wasn't live music, it wasn't trivia, it wasn't board games. It was actually the brewery tour, which is really, really fascinating to think about.
Well, I think for the social gatherer, maybe it's one of their first experiences at a brewery, to get to experience where the beer is made is a whole new, type of experience for them. And for the beer geeks, just to go dive deeper into the process and behind the scenes, it's a win for everyone, no matter what your level of beer education is.
Absolutely. Sticking along with the presentation here, the number 4 segment here for the larger scale breweries was travelers. We have our traveler buddy on the left there with a beer in hand and a thumbs up, really enjoying himself. So these folks are non-locals, primarily seeking experiences. And this is another hyper positive segment. Also approximately 10% of consumers for this larger scale. And calling out a difference again between this and the nano segment, the travelers for nano segment made up less than 1% of the overall population, which makes sense, right? You think about what a nano brewery is, it's often a local community's backbone, serving a hyper localized population. So really focusing here on travelers for just the larger scale breweries. Beer variety is number 1, food number 2, environment number 3. Not a whole lot of differentiators between other groups, but really the only experienced detractors being service and staff. They're thinking about that. They're on vacation. They're spending time and resources to be there and take time away from work. The real takeaway message for breweries here is, especially if you live in that sort of destination space or touristy space, you really need to make sure that that service is top notch, because these are folks that are only going to be there maybe one time or return once a year when they're back again on vacation. And these are the folks that you can't afford to have leaving those negative reviews, because it's going to be the one-time visitor. It's going to be the people that are perhaps more critical, but likely to leave a review if they have a great time, because it's a one-time experience. And when you're thinking about that social footprint of reviews, and you're in a new town and you search breweries near me, do you want to read something from a traveler who's been there one time that had perhaps an off day experience or understaffed experience, it's really just critical for these travelers to have that positive review, because you don't want the folks who are barely there controlling essentially the narrative of your online message.
And that also speaks to the quality of experience you need to provide people. When someone comes into your tap room you've never recognized them for before, give them just as high quality experience as you would the regular who's there every Friday night. Just because you've never seen someone before doesn't mean they might not be your next best customer, or next best customer of even just that day if they're traveling through.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So thinking again about who's actually making that online footprint here, we'll shift to the next persona, and locals. And locals is tricky, and there's a lot of differences between the larger segment and the nano segment for these two presentations. And again, you're looking at the larger segment here. They are a more negative group for the larger scale breweries than any other segment, 18% of all sentiment there being negative. And you'll see the sort of XX and asterisk at the top here. The overall percentage here for microbreweries and larger was around 10% of the entire sample. But the reason I put the X's is it's sometimes difficult to delineate who's a local and who's not based off of just a review. So things that would flag a local review for our purposes here, somebody that's been going there for 15 years, if they mention supporting local, if they mention, coming back often, those are the types of things that would flag it for our purposes. But thinking about it being a smaller segment for the large breweries, but for the nano breweries, it was actually the number 3 segment with nearly 20% of all consumers being locals. And for nano breweries, the locals were also much more likely to be positive in their overall reviews, sort of indicating that idea of that being sort of a community gathering place as opposed to just a brewery. Maybe they're more likely to know the owners or know the family that owns it, wanting to be very active in their support. Just thinking about the differences between the two are really fascinating here. For the larger scale breweries, locals can be difficult. They're more negative, and also just based off of the data, less likely to leave a review. And for the nano brewery segment, they're much more positive, and they're more likely to be supportive in that online space, building that footprint.
You mentioned reviews, and you said locals are less likely to leave a review. Obviously, breweries love having a ton of positive reviews. Are there any tips you can give to brewery owners and managers and staff out there to encourage and motivate, guests to leave that review?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andrew. And there's so many ways to go about this. I was thinking about us having this conversation the other day, and I think one of the companies that does this best, kind of going cross industry, is Chick-fil-A. I don't know when the last time you've had a Chick-fil-A sandwich and had a receipt is, but when you get your receipt from Chick-fil-A, there's a QR code at the bottom, and theirs is to take their survey. So thinking about this, you would have a code to leave a review, and then on your next visit, you get a free 6-piece nugget or what might have you. But tying and incentivizing reviews with customer retention, I think, is a beautiful way to go about this, because if you can have that little extra gimme that's going to knock off 10% of their next bill or whatever it is on that next time they visit, having that expiration too, like used by 60 days from leaving the review, that's going to, again, sort of encourage and habitualize folks coming back in, thinking about what's going to draw customers back. Other ways that are perhaps, I don't want to say manipulative is the wrong word, but less like, I don't know. I'm just going to skip over it. The word's escaping me, but I've seen it done on chalkboards on the way out. Little messages on the table saying please leave us a review. If you don't want to I guess pressurize a situation of like leave us a review and we'll give you this, like leaving the sort of, I guess, so-called bribery out of it, you would be able to do it in many other ways too. But I would certainly lean towards incentivizing that next visit, tying it to some sort of retention tactic.
Or even maybe, a discount off merchandise that day. Just something to kind of get them excited about your brand and some sort of reward.
Yeah, that's a great point with the merchandise, building that brand recognition and eventually that brand loyalty. So number 6 here, we have family visitors, family trippers, we called them. And for the larger segment, it was 5% of overall consumers. And these folks were also a more negative population. And I think this makes sense because when you have a family, you have caregivers, parents, and their children or dependents with them, and there are more people to please. Maybe mom can have a great time if there's something on the menu, but if there wasn't pizza, just using the picture on the screen here for her daughter or for her child or whatever it might be, she's probably not going to be as happy, and she starts throwing a fit. Mom, I want food. They're probably going to leave. And so having that overall positive experience when you start adding people to the equation, it's a much more difficult thing to do. One of the things that was particularly surprising for me was there were also very, very few family visitors leaving reviews at nanobreweries. And for food being such an integral part of nanobreweries, I anticipated seeing that family visitor number higher. But overall, it was still a very, very low number. So thinking again, this is a segment that you have ultimate competition. We kind of breezed over that with the last couple because they've been more beer focused or location focused. But with this, restaurants, family activity hubs, movies, bowling, arcades, Dave and Buster's, all those types of things that are going to attract families, where there's also going to be the option to get a beer and have a drink. It's something that's going to be really challenging to do and have these family visitors come back. Mind you, just an overall importance, this is a segment with lower stakes. It's only 5% in the larger segment of breweries, and it's even smaller for nano breweries. But still, nonetheless, you want that brewery to be a welcoming experience for all customers. So making sure that you have something that's going to appeal to children, if that's your brand, but really just having something for everyone. Importance can't be understated.
As a family tripper myself, I can appreciate this. And just the other day on Sunday, my son was like, Daddy, can I go to the arcade? And what he means is the brewery closest to our house that has a pinball machine. So it was a fantastic excuse for me to go out and try their new Baltic Porter. And the food options are great as well. Breweries I've seen recently even cater to the taste of children. I'm not saying this is what you should do or shouldn't do, but having that juice box available to my little one means I'm going to have that second beer I might not always get to have. Yeah. But one thing, Michael, that's actually surprising me about this slide is you see beer variety still the number one positive return motivator for this segment. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's a good call out there. And you're thinking about, who's writing the review, right? So first of all, we have parents writing it, but you have people talking about their partners, their spouses, and tastes vary so much, right? And when there are more taste buds to please, this is primarily here, I think, why you see beer variety being number one, because if you're going to go to a brewery, you're obviously some sort of a fan of beer, the beverage space. And it won't just be like one thing, though. It's not, you don't see specific beer on there at all in the top 5. So having something that's going to cater to different taste buds, making sure that there's going to be something on the menu, even beyond beer. This isn't on this slide, but just from the other research that we've completed, knowing that non-alcoholic alternatives, they resonate and are mentioned almost 2 to 1 by women to men. Women are so often looking for those non-beer alternatives, whether it's alcoholic or not, whether it's wine, whether it's cocktails, it could be cider. Making sure that you have that drink variety to make sure all tastes are covered.
No, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So one of the last slides here before we open up to Q&A, It's just a look at the top motivators and detractors by persona. So looking at really all of them together. Not gonna go through every column here, but focusing on motivators and detractors, some themes that we see across. I'm going to start actually with detractors, where service is a number one or number two detractor across all persona groups. So making sure you have that efficient service that's more friendly. If it's not necessarily the most efficient, there's greater patience with kind people than there is like slow people in terms of the speed of service. One of the other things that I'd like to call out that we didn't really mention is price. We see price popping into the top three in some of the categories, and really foodies and family trippers having the price being in the top three experience detractor. Think about families. Those are the people where the tabs are going to be higher. There are more mouths to feed. There are more thirsty people. Foodies, that tab is also going to be naturally higher because you're getting food and drink. So thinking about the different kinds of specials, when to have those specials. So maybe you don't want a food and drink special on Wednesday because it's a school night. Maybe you're going to keep that for Sunday and have it from 12 to 5 or something like that. Just thinking about what these insights bring and how that impacts the taproom offerings and so on. It's really, really key to understanding and making this as impactful as it possibly can be.
Michael, could you explain a little bit more the difference between, you list service and staff separately? Could you dive into what you define each as?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So think about service as the speed and efficiency and tone of your service and how it's being achieved. Are you having to wait a long time? Are you getting a nice greeting? Are you getting a thank you? And then think about staff as much more the personal elements of it. Did they stop to have a conversation, provide recommendations, get to know you a little bit, ask if it's been the first time that you've been here? More of that social hospitality element of it, as opposed to the nuts and bolts of getting a drink in your hand and food in your plate.
No, I know we're not looking at the slides right now, but who is staff most important to with regards to the different personas? Do you have that in your memory?
Yeah, that's actually travelers and family visitors have staff being number two there. So really, really fascinating to think about that. Travelers, it kind of makes sense, right? They're there. They don't necessarily know anyone. They're looking for that personal element, the relational element. And when you have a family, it's always really nice to, I'm not a parent myself, but I think about going to places with nieces or nephews, and when there's something else that you're responsible for taking care of there, having that positive interaction with the staff member is really, really critical.
And I know for me, not to keep beating the bush on this one, but went to a brewery in Northern Virginia at some point. I can't think of the name for the life of me. They had a beautiful patio, sat outdoors. It was a great experience. But the staff member who served us, the first thing she did was give my son crayons and a sheet of paper. And that little effort, going above and beyond, I mean, it set the tone for the visit. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a tremendous difference.
Was there anything about the detractors that surprised you?
It's a good question. As I think about kind of the larger segments of who's really going in there, those are the detractors that you'd probably want to focus on most. I guess honestly, food was very surprising as a detractor, and thinking about, it was number 2 detractor for social gatherers, number 1 for foodies, number 2 for beer geeks. Almost no matter which segment it was, the food played such a critical element and was a real game changer on decisions to either indicate that they would return or indicate that they would never come back.
It makes a difference. Now, looking at all the data and insight you provided today, for everyone watching, what's something you hope they do right now based off this presentation?
Yeah, I think
besides sign up for your research membership, which is going to have a ton of great data.
Yeah, I appreciate the plug, Andrew. That's awfully kind. One of the things that is kind of within this whole focus on service. 1 in 5 negative reviews was actually due to a first impression, something that happened in the first 10 minutes of that interaction. So if you think about that, 20% of all the negative reviews, it got off on the wrong foot, the first 10 minutes. So making sure that welcoming opening experience, it's so simple, right? It's not like brain surgery to say like first impressions matter, but having the data to surround it and really just focus in and dial in on what's most important, really crucial for breweries, just to give that reminder to their bartenders, to a hostess if that's the type of operation that you have, or a host, having just that little reminder, like make sure that you start that visit off with a smile and a greeting, because we're gonna see essentially 20% less negative feedback, data would suggest, based off of that one little simple thing alone.
I can completely echo that. Wearing my secret hopper hat when I'm looking at the taproom experience, we see that when someone receives low engagement on their first visit, when the staff's really not even paying attention, barely going through the motions, that guest, I could be 4% off. It's either 45 or 49% likely to return, meaning they're less than halfway likely to recommend and return that business to other people and friends. But when they receive a high level of engagement in service, they're 99% likely from that first visit to share it with other people. I mean, it just speaks to everything you're talking about today.
Yeah, it's not always rocket science, which I think is the fascinating thing about looking at data, because so many times we're always looking for that needle in a haystack, like what's the one thing that we're not thinking of, that we're missing, that's going to make everything so much better. And quite often it's right under your nose.
Awesome. Well, Michael, for anyone who's interested in reaching out to you to learn more or to sign up for the research membership, how can they do so?
Yeah, so you can check out our website. It's just www.craftbeeradvisoryservices.com. You could also email me personally. It's just michael@craftbeeradvisoryservices.com. Happy to talk to you about the membership. Happy to talk to you about the existing data that we've put together in 2022. As a really just starting out, trying to get off on the right foot in the industry, we are in the business of trying to provide value to you and staying committed to that. Every piece of research that we've put out in 2022 is available upon request for no charge. And just really excited. Thanks for popping in those links there, Andrew, particularly about the research membership there. You can learn a lot from the website, and more than happy to schedule a call with anybody else who'd be interested.
And one thing I know I'm excited about, I know your research members get to have some say in some of the data that you dive into. So while I'm interested in that data, I'm almost more interested to see what they're interested in learning about.
Yeah, it's going to be great, because in addition to the data scraping world that we live in today, also going to provide agency to all the breweries, the questions that they're thinking about, and getting those answered direct to beer drinker opinion. And I'm really, really excited to see the types of things that the breweries are going to be asking about. An opportunity not only to learn about what consumers are thinking for their own purposes, but also learn what other breweries are thinking about. And maybe there's something that they're thinking about that they haven't yet. So just a great opportunity for knowledge share and community building, all the things that this industry is about.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Michael, for sharing your insight today. Everybody be sure to reach out to Michael if you have any questions or want to learn more. Thanks again. And Michael, I'll see you soon, hopefully in person.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Take care. Cheers.